You just decided to read this sentence. Or did you? You feel like you chose it. A calm little decision made by the calm little you sitting behind your eyes. But the real answer is far stranger. Somewhere in your skull, before you ever felt yourself decide anything, your brain had already decided for you. This is not a theory, it is a measurement. In the early 1980s, a scientist named Benjamin Libet wired people up to an EEG machine and asked them to do something almost embarrassingly simple. Flick your wrist, he said, whenever you feel like it. Just watch this clock and tell me the exact moment you decided to move. Nothing complicated, no trick question, just notice the instant you chose. But Libet was not really testing their wrists, he was testing their timeline. Because seconds before each person felt the urge to move, their brain had already started building it. A slow electrical ramp, rising quietly in the motor cortex, was called the readiness potential, and it began firing up to a full second before anyone reported feeling the decision. Read that again. The brain moved first. The feeling of choosing came second. The self-aware "I decided" arrived like a headline written after the story already happened. Think about what that means for a moment. You have spent your entire life assuming there is a tiny commander in your head, sitting at a control panel, pressing buttons labeled walk, speak, reach, choose. Libet's clock suggested something closer to a press secretary. Someone who shows up after the decisions are made and calmly announces them to the rest of you as if they had been in the room the whole time. Why would a brain do that? Because a body cannot afford to wait for permission. Your ancestors did not have the luxury of a slow committee meeting every time a shadow moved in the grass. A decision built in milliseconds, then explained by consciousness in hindsight, is faster than a decision debated by a mind that knows it is choosing. Speed kept things alive. Certainty was optional. For decades, scientists argued that this was too small an effect to matter. A fraction of a second, they said. A quirk of a wrist-flicking experiment. Surely something as enormous as a life decision works differently. Then in 2008, a neuroscientist named John-Dylan Haynes pushed the same question into a brain scanner. His participants pressed a button with either their left or right hand, whenever they wanted, while lying inside an fMRI machine. Haynes was not just measuring a ramp anymore. He was hunting for the choice itself. He found it up to 10 seconds before people said they had made it. 10 seconds, not milliseconds. An eternity in brain time. Patterns in the frontal and parietal cortex quietly leaned toward left or right long before any person felt a preference form. The choice was already taking shape, while the mind still believed it was blank. So if the decision is built before you feel it, what exactly is you doing in the meantime? This is where a psychologist named Daniel Wegner enters the story. Wegner spent years studying something he called the illusion of conscious will. His argument was not that you are a puppet. It was subtler and somehow stranger. He argued that the feeling of willing an action is itself something your brain manufactures, a kind of internal narration layered on top of behavior that was already underway. He proved it with a simple, unsettling trick. In one experiment, people sat with their hands resting near a moving cursor on a screen, controlled partly by someone else. When a sound cued them just before the cursor stopped at a target, many participants swore they had guided it there themselves. They felt the intention. They felt the control. None of it was real. Your brain, it turns out, is extremely good at telling itself a story where it is the author, even when it is only the narrator. None of this means you are helpless. It does not mean your choices are meaningless or that some puppeteer is pulling invisible strings. It means the architecture of decision-making runs mostly in the dark, in circuits you cannot consciously watch, and only afterward does a spotlight swing over and illuminate what already happened, dressed up as a decision. Here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. You do this every single day, dozens of times, without noticing. You feel yourself decide to check your phone, and yet the reach for it often begins before the thought fully forms. You feel yourself decide to say something in an argument, and yet the sentence was often loading before you knew you agreed with it. The felt sense of authorship shows up late to almost everything it takes credit for. Does this make free will fake? Scientists still argue about that, and honestly the question may be less useful than it sounds. What Libet, Haynes, and Wegner really uncovered was something more practical. The mind is not one single decision-maker. It is a layered system where fast unconscious processes propose and a slower conscious process reports, edits, and sometimes vetoes. That veto matters. Libet himself pointed out that even if the urge to act starts unconsciously, people still seem to retain a narrow window to stop it, a kind of free won't rather than free will. You may not author the impulse, but you often get the final say on whether it becomes an action. So the next time you feel a decision arrive, notice the timing of it. Notice how confident it feels, how instant, how obviously yours. And remember that somewhere just beneath that confidence, a process you will never consciously witness already did the real work, quietly in the dark, before the lights came on. You didn't just decide to read this sentence. Something in you decided long before you knew it, and the feeling of choosing was simply the last one to arrive.